The city of Grayville has always been a symbol of tranquility and prosperity. Its quiet streets, surrounded by greenery, and the luxurious mansions owned by the city's most powerful people seemed like the perfect place to live a carefree life. But one evening, this illusory peace was shattered by a terrible event. Ted Gunther, a brilliant engineer known for his rationality and cold mind, returned home to his luxurious mansion. His wife and a young and beautiful woman was in the house. They had been living in a strained marriage for a long time, and that evening Ted decided to put an end to the relationship. But his decision was not an emotional one. It was thought out to the smallest detail. Ted had prepared everything in advance. In his workshop, he created a replica of the gun, identical to his registered weapon. This copy was to be the key to his plan. He had calculated every step, every minute, every detail. Ted knew the police would be impressed with his precision. On the evening of the event, and was sitting in the living room listening to music. Ted walked into the room and calmly said, "And we need to talk." She looked up, surprised by his cold tone, but did not have time to react. A shot rang out in the silence of the house. The bullet hit her in the head, but Ted had calculated the angle and force so that she survived, even though she fell into a coma. After the shooting, Ted remained absolutely calm. He carefully wiped the fingerprints off the fake gun and put it on the floor next to Anne's body. Then he poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat in a chair in the living room, and waited for the police to arrive. He even called 911 himself. "This is Ted Gunther. I shot my wife. Please come." The police arrived a few minutes later. When officers entered the house, they saw a picture that looked like a perfect confession and was lying unconscious, and Ted was sitting with a calm look on his face, a glass in his hand. "I did it," he said, barely holding back a smile. The officers immediately arrested Ted, having no reason to doubt his words. They seized the gun, which turned out to be registered in his name. Everything seemed obvious: jealousy, domestic conflict, and an impulsive crime. But experienced investigators who had worked with such cases before could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later, during the initial inspection, one of the officers noticed that the crime scene looked too clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no surprises. Everything looked like it was staged. But at first, no one could even imagine how complex and cunning Ted Gunther's plan was. That evening was the beginning of a game in which truth and lies were intertwined in a graceful dance. Ted knew what was coming and was prepared for every step of the system. He relied not only on his knowledge of engineering, but also on human nature: fear, pride, greed, and self-confidence. And now the game was on. Will Croft was the type of prosecutor who was both respected and feared. His career was developing rapidly. With a degree from a prestigious university and several brilliant victories in court cases, he had become a young star in the prosecution. At 32 years old, Will had it all: confidence, charisma, and an unwavering belief in his ability to win. His ambition was simple but bold. He wanted to leave public service and join an influential private law firm, where he would enjoy a huge salary and prestige. Will received the Ted Hunter case as his last major challenge before his transition. It seemed like an easy victory: a confession from the accused, a gun with his fingerprints on it, and a motive that seemed obvious. This will be a formality, Will told his colleagues when he received the case. However, the first meeting with Ted began to undermine that confidence. Gunther behaved not like a defendant but like a conductor leading an orchestra. He answered questions with irony, occasionally addressing the prosecutor with casual comments. "You must be very smart, Mr. Croft," Ted said during one of the interrogations. "But have you ever thought that maybe not everything is as it seems?" These words struck a chord with Will. He was used to criminals who were afraid, trying to make excuses or making deals with the investigators. But Ted was different. He seemed to enjoy this process, in which he already knew the outcome. With each passing day of the investigation, Will felt the tension building. The crime scene, which had seemed indisputable, began to be questioned. Ballistics analysis revealed that the gun found at the scene had not been used in the shooting. This discovery was the first serious blow to the case. Will began to dig up more about Ted. He learned that Gunther was not only an engineer, but also a master manipulator. His colleagues described him as a man who always had everything under control. He could convince you that 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, and you would believe it, recalled one of his friends. Will also discovered that Ted and Ann's marriage was far from perfect, and was planning a divorce, and was having an affair with a law firm employee who specialized in prenuptial agreements. This fact could have been a motive for the crime, but it also added even more questions to the perfectly orchestrated scene. The pressure on Will from his superiors began to grow. "We can't lose this case," the district attorney said, but Will realized that he was no longer dealing with a standard crime. He began to see the Gunther case as a personal challenge. At night, Will stayed in the office, reviewing evidence, reading reports, and trying to figure out what he had missed. He felt that Ted was several steps ahead of him, but he couldn't figure out how. "What are you hiding?" he kept saying as he looked at Hunter's photo in the file. This case was not only a professional challenge for Will, but also a personal one. It made him doubt his own abilities, but at the same time, it awakened an irresistible desire to find the truth. He had never faced such a difficult and dangerous opponent in his career as Ted Gunther. A key element of the case against Ted Gunther was the gun found at the crime scene. It was lying next to Ann's body. His fingerprints were on the handle, and Ted himself openly stated that it was the murder weapon. For Will Croft, this seemed like direct and indisputable evidence. But everything changed when the results of the ballistics examination came in. Experts found that not a single shot had been fired from the found gun. There were no traces of gunpowder inside the barrel, which usually remain after the weapon is used. Instead, the bullet mark found in the wall was a perfect match for another gun, one that the police had never found. This discovery stunned Will and his team. All confidence in the simplicity of the case began to crumble. If the gun found at the crime scene was a fake, where was the real murder weapon? And could Ted's confession be trusted if he was deliberately misleading everyone? In court, Gunther's lawyer immediately took advantage of this situation, calling the prosecution's case built on a shaky foundation. "My client told the truth," the lawyer said. "He confessed to his involvement because he believed that this is what the system wanted him to do. But the facts are different. Can the system convict a man on the basis of false evidence?" These words infuriated Will. He realized that Ted had deliberately created this confusion, using his brilliant mind and knowledge to outmaneuver the investigation. Will began to rethink all aspects of the case. How had Gunther switched the gun? Did he act alone, or did he have accomplices? Back at his office, Will organized an emergency meeting with his team. "We need to find the real gun," he said. "And we need to figure out how Ted was able to do it knowing that the police would be looking at every little detail." A detailed study of the case file revealed that Ted had access to a workshop where he could make an identical copy of his gun. He knew how to leave his fingerprints on it without actually firing it. All of this looked like part of a well-thought-out plan to undermine the credibility of the evidence. To increase the pressure on Ted, Will decided to call him in for a new interrogation. But Gunther, as always, remained confident and even a little condescending. "Detective, prosecutor, you're looking for answers in the wrong place," he said. "Have you ever thought that the system always wants to find someone to blame, even if the process itself is at fault?" Will realized that every piece of evidence that seemed obvious could be a trap. Ted wasn't just defending himself. He was playing his own game, where every step of the investigation became part of his script. Despite this, Will decided not to give up. He began to look for new clues, watching surveillance footage, studying locations where Ted could have been in the days leading up to the crime. Every detail could be important, but time passed, and the real murder weapon remained unknown. For Will, this situation became not only a professional challenge, but also a personal battle. He realized that Ted was enjoying every moment of their confrontation, and to win, Will had to find what was left out and destroy Ted Gunther's perfect plan. After ballistics destroyed a key piece of evidence, the case against Ted Gunther was on the verge of collapse. But the real test for Will Croft was not only the struggle with legal intricacies, but also the confrontation with Ted on a psychological level. Hunter was not just a defendant. He turned into a director of the whole situation, where every move of the prosecutor's office was part of his carefully thought-out plan. Ted constantly demonstrated his superiority, never missing an opportunity to provoke Will. At every hearing, he behaved as if he were sitting in the audience, not in the dock, enjoying the show. His sarcastic comments and piercing stare made Will feel like he was fighting for a case in someone else's script. "Detective, prosecutor," Ted once said, looking directly at Will, "don't you think justice is a game where the winner is not the one who is right, but the one who is better prepared?" Will knew that Ted was provoking him, but he couldn't help but feel it affecting his confidence. He began to doubt his ability to control the situation. Every action, every argument in court seemed as if Ted had foreseen it in advance. To change the course of the case, Will decided to take a risk. He invited Ted to a private interview, unofficial, without the participation of lawyers. It was atypical and could have drawn criticism, but Will felt it was the only way to get Gunther to make a mistake. Ted appeared at the interrogation in an impeccable suit, confident as always. He sat down across from Will and looked at him expectantly, arms crossed. "What do you want, Ted?" Will asked, starting the conversation. "Justice," Ted replied with a slight smile. "Isn't that what you want too?" "Your justice looks like manipulation," Will said. "You're gaming the system. But do you realize that every game has its limits?" Ted leaned forward, his voice quieter, but all the more menacing. "The system you're defending is a giant with feet of clay. I'm just showing you how vulnerable it is. And you know what? I'm better at it than you are." Hunter is not only playing with the case, but also with his own confidence. But this game gave Will a new purpose. He decided to focus on Ted's weaknesses that he had been so careful to hide. During the following meetings, Will began to use Ted's tactics against him. He asked unexpected questions, changed the subject, and forced Gunther out of his comfort zone. One of these moments occurred when Will mentioned Ted's family affairs, which he always avoided discussing. "Was your wife planning a divorce?" Will said during one of the sessions. "Wasn't that the real reason for your behavior? Fear of losing control?" Ted lost his composure for the first time. His eyes narrowed, and a shadowy hint of anger appeared on his face. It was the first crack in his armor. Will realized that he had found a weakness. Ted, though a master manipulator, still had an emotional connection to the situation. This psychological duel continued throughout the case, with each meeting between them becoming more and more tense. But Will was no longer the confident young star he had been at the beginning. Now he was a warrior, ready to fight to the last. The climax of the case against Ted Gunther was approaching. Will Croft knew he could not afford to make any more mistakes. All the previous failures had only hardened him, and the tension that was growing with each passing day made him focus on finding something that would finally break Ted's perfect strategy. Fate handed Will an unexpected chance when his team discovered new evidence, a video recording from a hidden camera in the hotel where Anne was meeting with the man she was planning a future with after her divorce. This recording, made the day before the attack, showed Ted appearing at the hotel entrance and following the couple. His demeanor was calm, but his distant gaze and characteristic movements betrayed a man preparing for something big. When this recording was presented in court, it caused a real explosion of emotions. Ted's lawyer tried to challenge the authenticity of the video, but experts confirmed that the image was not a fake. This was the first serious blow to Hunter's defense. Will did not stop there. He prepared another move. In the course of additional investigation, Will's team found a recording of a phone call made by Ted that night. The call was made to the customer service of a company that manufactured safes. Ted was asking how quickly the contents of the safe could be destroyed if an automatic document incineration system was used. The operator's response was vague, but the very fact of the call opened up new opportunities for the prosecution. The key moment in the trial was the interrogation of an employee of the same company who had installed the safe in Gunther's house. He confirmed that Ted had a special mechanism in the safe that could instantly destroy documents. This explained why the police were unable to find any incriminating material during the search. Ted listened intently to this testimony, remaining calm, but his eyes betrayed tension. He realized that Will had found a way to force his defense to go from offense to defense. Will's final blow was a revelation that concerned the gun itself, the murder weapon that had never been found. Will presented a witness, a former colleague of Ted's, who said that Gunther had once created prototypes of weapons for the military. These prototypes were equipped with self-destructing technology after use. This information could explain why the real gun was never found. It was destroyed immediately after being fired. Ted Gunther is a genius, Will said in his speech to the jury. But even geniuses make mistakes. And today we see the result of his underestimation of the power of truth. The jury retired to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. For the first time, Ted looked uneasy, although he tried to hide it behind a mask of indifference. He realized that his carefully crafted plan was beginning to fall apart. When the jury returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty. Ted Gunther was sentenced to life without parole. But even after the verdict, his last words made everyone think, this is just the first game. The game is never over. Ted Gunther's case was officially closed and the verdict announced. But even after the court made its decision, there was no sense of closure. For Will Croft, this case was more than just a simple courtroom confrontation. It forced him to reconsider his understanding of justice, morality, and his own role in the system. Ted Gunther, who was sentenced to life in prison, left the courtroom with the same cold confidence he had shown from the beginning. His last words before he was led away left a sense of uncertainty in the hearts of everyone present. We will see each other again. The game goes on. One day Will received an unexpected letter. It was on his desk with no return address. It was just a single piece of paper with a short message. The perfect trap is to make it look like a firing. Will had no doubt that the letter was from Ted. He felt the same tension again that he had experienced in court. What did it mean? Was it a hint that the game was not over? In the weeks that followed, Will couldn't shake the feeling that Ted had left something for later. Some hidden trap or plan that would bide his time. He went back to his normal work schedule, but now his approach to things was more deliberate and thorough. This case taught him not to take anything for granted. There is one more important figure in this story, and Hunter, the victim whose survival was a miracle. After a long period of treatment, she gradually began to recover, although the consequences of her injury remained with her forever. The loss of memory of the night of the crime and constant physical pain became a daily challenge for her, and decided to leave Grayville and start a new life away from Ted's shadow. She moved to a small town where she began volunteering with an organization that helped victims of domestic violence. Her story inspired many people, but Anne had always avoided publicity. She was afraid that any mention of her would bring her back to the past. One day, Anne received an anonymous letter similar to the one Will had received. It read, "The truth is always more complicated than it seems." The letter made her feel anxious, but she decided to ignore it, hoping it was just a joke. However, this detail made Will and Anne wonder again. Was the Ted Gunther case really over? Meanwhile, the press continued to actively discuss the case. The public was divided. Some considered Ted a brilliant manipulator who got what he deserved, while others saw him as a victim of a system that sought to win at any cost. The books and documentaries devoted to the case only added new layers to the myth of Ted Gunther. One day, Will received an unexpected letter. It was on his desk with no return address. It contained only one piece of paper with a short message. The perfect trap is to make it look like a firing. Will had no doubt that this letter was from Ted. He felt the same tension again that he had experienced in court. What did it mean? Was it a hint that the game wasn't over yet? Will then decided to conduct his own informal investigation to see if Ted had left any other traces or plans. He began reviewing the case files, looking for details that might have slipped through the cracks earlier. At the same time, he strengthened his relationships with his colleagues, who now looked up to him with more respect. For Ted, prison was not the end of the game. He maintained his reputation as a cold-blooded genius even behind bars. Other inmates feared and respected him. His lawyers continued to file appeals, although the chances of success were slim. One night, while working late, Will found a note among some old documents that he had written on the first day of the case. Winning is not the end goal. Winning is just the beginning. He smiled and put it aside, knowing that there were many more such beginnings to come.